when a poor farmer gave his only cow to a stranger. He never imagined that years later, this same stranger would become his lifeline. In the remote villages of rural India, a single cow can mean the difference between survival and starvation. For Rajiv, his beloved Lakshmi wasn't just livestock, she was family. But one fateful afternoon, faced with a stranger's desperation, Rajiv made a choice that defied all logic. What happened next would test the limits of his sacrifice before coming full circle in the most unexpected way. In the small village of Chandrapur, Rajiv woke each morning before dawn to tend to Lakshmi, the brown and white cow whose milk had kept his family alive for 7 years. Her gentle eyes followed him as he cleaned her pen, his calloused hands working with practiced precision. "This milk will fetch enough for rice today," he whispered, patting her warm flank. But deep inside, worry gnawed at him. The drought had lasted longer than anyone expected, and Lakshmi's milk production was declining. That afternoon, as the merciless sun beat down on the dusty path leading to the village, a well-dressed stranger stumbled and collapsed near Rajiv's modest hut. Blood seeped from a wound on his temple. The man clutched an empty wallet and a crumpled photograph. "Please," the stranger gasped, his voice barely audible. "My name is Vikram. My mother is dying in Delhi. I was robbed on my journey. I need to reach her before." His voice broke, eyes filled with the same desperation Rajiv had seen in drought-stricken farmers who'd lost everything. Rajiv's wife Meena pulled him aside, her whisper urgent and harsh. "We barely have enough for ourselves. The children haven't had proper meals in weeks. This man's problems are not ours." But something in Vikram's eyes, the raw fear of losing a parent, struck Rajiv's heart. He thought of his own mother, how he would move mountains to be by her side in her final moments. "How much do you need?" Rajiv asked, already knowing he had nothing to give. 4,000 rupees for transport and medicine," Vikram replied, his hands shaking. The village headman, who had gathered with others to see the commotion, laughed coldly. "No one here has that kind of money. Move along." But Rajiv couldn't let it go. That night, as his children slept with empty stomachs, he made a decision that would haunt his family for years to come. At dawn, he led Lakshmi to where Vikram had spent the night under a banyan tree. "Take her," Rajiv said, his voice breaking as he handed over the rope. "Sell her in the next town. She's worth at least 5,000 rupees." "But this is your livelihood," Vikram protested, eyes wide with disbelief. "And your mother is your heart," Rajiv replied simply. "Go to her." As Vikram led Lakshmi away, Meena's wails echoed through the village. Their son Arjun, only 10 years old, watched in silent confusion as their only source of income disappeared down the dusty road. "You've killed us all, with your foolish heart," Meena sobbed, collapsing in the dirt. What Rajiv didn't know was that this sacrifice would plunge his family into years of unimaginable hardship. Hardship that would test not just their survival, but the very bonds that held them together. The morning after Lakshmi left with Vikram, Rajiv's hut felt eerily quiet. The familiar sounds of her gentle lowing no longer greeted the dawn. The corner where her feed had been stored now stood empty, a constant reminder of what was lost. Even the rope that had hung from the wooden post, the same rope Rajiv had used to lead Lakshmi to pasture every day for 7 years, dangled like a severed limb, useless, without purpose. "Get up," Meena said coldly, her eyes red from a night of crying. "The children need to eat." But what would they eat? The small clay pot that once held Lakshmi's milk remained dry on the kitchen shelf. Rajiv's youngest daughter, Priya, just 4 years old, kept asking when Lakshmi would return home. Her small fingers traced the empty feeding trough, confused by the absence of warmth and life that had always been there. "She's gone to help someone," was all Rajiv could say, his throat tight with emotion he dared not display. "But who will help us now, Baba?" Arjun asked, his young voice carrying wisdom beyond his years. Rajiv had no answer. The weight of his decision pressed down on him like the heavy yoke he'd once placed across Lakshmi's strong shoulders during planting season. That yoke now hung on the wall, another useless artifact of better days. Word spread quickly through Chandrapur. By midday, neighbors who had once greeted Rajiv with respect now whispered behind his back. Women at the communal well fell silent when Meena approached, their pitying glances more painful than outright scorn. The village headman, Govind Singh, made no effort to hide his contempt. "This is what happens when fools think themselves saints," he announced loudly at the village well, his voice carrying intentionally to where Rajiv was drawing water. "Now his children will starve while he polishes his halo. A cow. Not a rupee or two, but his entire livelihood given to a stranger who probably laughed all the way to the next village." The headman's son, Prakash, a boy of 12 with his father's cruel streak, took particular delight in tormenting Arjun. "Your father must hate you," he taunted during the lunch break at the village school. "Why else would he feed a stranger's mother while his own children go hungry?" Arjun came home that afternoon with a bloody nose and torn shirt. "The other boys said my father is either crazy or stupid," he said, wiping tears away angrily. "Which one is it, Baba?" Prakash said only a madman gives away his family's food. Rajiv knelt beside his son, cleaning the blood with a damp cloth. His hands trembled slightly, not from the sight of blood, but from the impossible task of explaining complex morality to a hungry child. "Sometimes, beta, the right choice feels wrong for a long time before it feels right again," he said softly. "How long?" Arjun demanded, his young face contorted with a mixture of shame and anger. Rajiv had no answer that a child could understand. How could he explain that sometimes the heart makes decisions the mind cannot justify? That compassion often comes with a cost that logic cannot reconcile? That night, as the family ate a meager meal of watery lentils, all they could afford without the daily income from Lakshmi's milk, the silence was broken only by the sound of spoons scraping against near-empty bowls. Priya fell asleep before finishing her portion, her small body curled against her grandmother's side. The old woman stroked her granddaughter's hair, her eyes meeting Rajiv's across the dim light of their single oil lamp. It was then that Meena finally voiced the question that had been burning inside her since Lakshmi disappeared down the dusty road. "Did you even ask his name? This stranger you gave our life to?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a scythe through wheat. "Vikram," Rajiv replied softly. "His name was Vikram." "Vikram," she repeated bitterly. "A name that will haunt us until we die of hunger. Did he tell you where in Delhi? Did he promise to return the cow? Did you think of anything practical at all, or were you too busy playing the hero?" Each question struck Rajiv like a physical blow. He had asked none of these things. In the moment of Vikram's desperation, such details had seemed trivial compared to the man's anguish. "His mother was dying," Rajiv said simply. "And now our children might follow," Meena replied, rising to clear the dishes with a clatter that woke Priya. The child began to cry, her hunger making sleep restless and uncomfortable. The days that followed brought new challenges that Rajiv had not anticipated. Without Lakshmi's milk to sell at the weekly market in the neighboring town, There was no money for school fees. The headmaster, a reasonable man who respected education above all else, allowed Arjun to continue attending for a month on credit, but warned that arrangements would need to be made. "Your boy has a good mind," he told Rajiv. "It would be a shame to waste it in the fields." Rajiv took on day labor in nearby fields, joining the ranks of landless workers who gathered at dawn, hoping to be chosen for that day's planting or harvesting. The work was sporadic and paid barely enough for one proper meal a day. His hands, once calloused from the gentle work of caring for his cow, now bled from cutting rice stalks from dawn until dusk. The sun beat down mercilessly on his back as he worked alongside men half his age and twice as strong. By evening, his muscles screamed in protest, unused to the punishing labor of commercial farming. Yet he never complained, never spoke of regret, even as his body betrayed him with exhaustion that made even lifting a water jug difficult. "You should ask your cousin in Nagpur for help," Meena suggested after a particularly difficult week when Rajiv had found only 2 days of work. "Surely Deepak would loan us enough for a new calf." "And repay him with what?" Rajiv asked. "Another man's charity is not the answer to our problems." His pride, the same pride that had allowed him to help a stranger, now prevented him from seeking help for himself. This contradiction was not lost on Meena, whose initial anger had gradually transformed into a quiet, simmering resentment that manifested in small ways. A meal served cold, a torn shirt left unmended, conversations that ended abruptly when he entered the room. A month after Lakshmi's departure, Rajiv's mother, the family matriarch whose quiet strength had always held them together, took him aside as he returned from another fruitless day searching for work. She led him to the neem tree behind their hut, away from Meena's ears. "I understand why you did it," she said, her weathered hand on his shoulder. "Your father would have done the same. He always said that a man who turns away from another's suffering invites suffering into his own home." Her words were the only balm to his wounded spirit, but even they couldn't ease the practical reality of their situation. The children grew thinner. Priya's once plump cheeks hollowed, and Arjun's school uniform hung loose on his frame. Meena's once loving glances had hardened into resentful stares. "The Sharma family has offered to take Arjun as a house servant," she announced one evening. "He would at least get regular meals." "My son will not be another man's servant," Rajiv replied firmly. "Not while I have strength in my body." But his strength was failing. The inconsistent diet and punishing labor had taken their toll. One evening, he collapsed on the path home, a passing farmer finding him feverish and disoriented. For 3 days, he burned with infection from a cut on his foot that had festered in the muddy fields. During his illness, neighbors who had criticized his decision now brought small offerings: a handful of rice, medicinal herbs, a few precious spoonfuls of ghee. The village, for all its judgment, still held to the ancient traditions of community during crisis. "See?" his mother whispered as she applied a poultice to his foot. "Goodness calls to goodness, even in hard times." When the monsoon season came, bringing rain that would have normally meant better feed for Lakshmi and more milk to sell, Rajiv found himself staring at the downpour with nothing to celebrate. The rain that should have been a blessing now turned the paths to mud, making the journey to find work even more difficult. The small vegetable patch behind their hut, which Meena had expanded in desperation, became waterlogged, the tender shoots of spinach and okra drowning in the deluge. "The cow would have had her calf by now," Arjun remarked one evening as they huddled inside their leaking hut, the sound of rain a constant reminder of nature's indifference to human suffering. "We could have had 2 cows." The simple mathematics of their loss, calculated by a child, struck Rajiv with fresh pain. Yes, Lakshmi had been pregnant when he gave her away. That had been part of her value, the promise of a second income source within months. Had Vikram known? Had he sold a pregnant cow for even more profit? These thoughts, which Rajiv had suppressed for months, now surfaced with the persistence of monsoon mosquitoes. Despite these hardships, Rajiv maintained his dignity. Each morning, he would still rise before dawn, say his prayers, and face the day with the same gentle determination that had led him to help Vikram. But inside, doubt gnawed at him like a hungry rat. Had he been foolish? Had his compassion doomed his family? These questions haunted his dreams, where Lakshmi often appeared, her large brown eyes reproachful, her udder heavy with milk just beyond his reach. 6 months after Vikram disappeared with Lakshmi, a traveling merchant named Sunil Das passed through Chandrapur with fabrics, spices, and news from Delhi and beyond. While the women of the village examined his silks and the men haggled over the price of cardamom, Rajiv approached him cautiously. "Have you heard of anyone named Vikram? A man traveling to Delhi for his sick mother?" Rajiv asked, his voice low to avoid the ridicule such a question would bring from his neighbors. The merchant scratched his gray beard thoughtfully. "Delhi is a city of millions, Bhai. There are thousands of Vikrams in Delhi alone. Your man could be anywhere or nowhere." "He would have arrived with a cow," Rajiv persisted. "A brown and white cow, heavy with calf." Sunil Das shook his head. "I deal in cloth and spice, not livestock. But I can tell you this. If your Vikram was a con man, as you seem to fear, the cow would have been sold long before reaching Delhi. The markets in Bhopal give good prices." That night, as his family slept in the single room that served as their home, Rajiv sat outside under the stars. The night was clear after weeks of rain, the Milky Way spreading across the sky like spilled milk, a cosmic reminder of what they had lost. He wondered if Vikram had reached his mother in time. Had the old woman blessed her son for his journey? Had she recovered, thanks to the medicine her son could now afford? Rajiv hoped the sacrifice had meant something. That somewhere, a family had been spared the grief his own now endured. A shooting star streaked across the heavens, and Rajiv, despite his Hindu upbringing, found himself making a wish as his Christian neighbor had taught him to do. He wished not for Lakshmi's return or for wealth to replace her, but simply for the assurance that his act of kindness had not been in vain. But the universe offered no immediate answer, only the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a jackal. And as the night deepened around him, Rajiv could not know that the worst was yet to come, as nature itself would soon turn against his noble heart with a ferocity that would test not just his family's survival, but the very foundations of his faith in human goodness. The second year after Lakshmi's departure brought drought to Chandrapur. The monsoon, which had flooded their fields the previous year, now failed to appear at all. The land cracked under the relentless sun, and wells that had served the village for generations ran dry. "It's a punishment," the village headman declared during a community meeting. "The gods are displeased." His eyes lingered on Rajiv, the implication clear to everyone present. For Rajiv's family, the drought multiplied their already considerable struggles. Without water, Mina's vegetable garden withered and died. The day labor that had sustained them, however meagerly, became scarce as larger farms prioritized their permanent workers. "We should leave," Mina suggested one evening, her once round face now angular with hunger. My sister in Mumbai says her husband could find you working construction. Rajiv shook his head. This is our home. Our ancestors are buried here. We will endure. But endurance came at a terrible price. Rajiv's mother, whose strength had been a pillar for the family, fell ill that winter. Her cough, which began as a minor irritation, deepened into a rattle that shook her frail body. It's the dust, she insisted, waving away their concerns. Nothing more. But Rajiv recognized the symptoms. Tuberculosis had claimed his father years before. Without proper medicine, his mother's fate would be the same. The irony was not lost on him. He had given away their livelihood to help a stranger save his mother, and now he couldn't save his own. When he approached the village doctor, the man was sympathetic but direct. She needs antibiotics and proper care. That costs money, Rajiv. Money you don't have. That night, Rajiv made the hardest decision since giving away Lakshmi. He sold the small plot of land that had been in his family for 3 generations. Land too dry to farm now, but still their only real asset. The buyer, a wealthy farmer from a neighboring village who was consolidating land, paid far less than it's worth. It's worthless in this drought, he said with a shrug. I'm doing you a favor. The money bought medicine and food, but not enough of either. His mother, aware of the sacrifice, refused half her doses. Give them to the children, she insisted. Their lives stretch before them. Mine is behind me. She died as the first rain in 18 months began to fall, the drops pattering on the roof like gentle applause for a life well lived. Rajiv performed the funeral rites with a dignity that surprised even those who had judged him most harshly. Arjun, now 12, stood beside his father at the cremation, his young face set in the same stoic expression Rajiv wore. I won't forget her, he promised. Neither will I, Rajiv replied, placing his hand on his son's shoulder. And I won't forget what she taught us. That kindness matters, even when it hurts. The rain that came too late for Rajiv's mother brought new challenges. Without land, they were now truly at the mercy of others. Rajiv found work clearing drainage ditches, backbreaking labor that paid barely enough to feed his family 1 meal a day. Priya, now 6, should have started school. But there was no money for books or the required uniform. Instead, she stayed home with Meena, learning to cook and clean with a solemnity no child should possess. I don't need school, she told Rajiv when he apologized for yet another broken promise. I need Lakshmi back. Her words cut deeper than any knife. 3 years had passed since that fateful day, and still, his youngest child measured their loss by the absence of the cow. It was during this darkest period that Rajiv's faith began to waver. Not his faith in the gods, that remained unshaken, but his faith in his own decision. Had he been naive? Had Vikram been a con man, preying on rural simplicity? These doubts consumed him until a traveling holy man passed through the village. The sadhu, with his matted hair and ash-covered body, stopped Rajiv as he returned from work. You carry a heavy burden, the man said, his eyes penetrating in a way that made Rajiv uncomfortable. No heavier than most, Rajiv replied, attempting to move past. The sadhu blocked his path. Not on your shoulders, in your heart. You gave something precious away, and wonder if you were deceived. Rajiv stared, shocked by the accuracy of the stranger's assessment. The universe keeps its accounts, the sadhu continued. No act of true compassion goes unrecorded. Remember that when the darkness seems complete. Before Rajiv could respond, the holy man walked away, his thin frame disappearing into the gathering dusk like a spirit returning to the ether. That night, Rajiv dreamed of Lakshmi, but unlike his usual dreams where she stood just out of reach, this time she walked beside him, her warm flank pressed against his side as they traveled a road he didn't recognize. He woke with a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years, though the practical realities of their situation remained unchanged. The fourth year brought a new government initiative to the region, a microfinance program designed to help the rural poor start small businesses. When the official from the city arrived to explain the program, Rajiv attended the meeting with skepticism. "Loans," one farmer scoffed. "So we can be in debt as well as poor?" But Rajiv listened carefully. The terms were fair, better than fair, and the training provided could open doors previously closed to people like him. Against Mina's objections, he applied for a small loan to start a vegetable stand in the weekly market. Using the connections he'd made as a day laborer, he arranged to buy produce from farms where he'd worked, adding a small markup to sell in the village. The business began, slowly. Many villagers, still viewing Rajiv as the fool who gave away his cow, were reluctant to buy from him. But the quality of his vegetables and his fair prices gradually won them over. Arjun, now 14 and as tall as his father, proved to have a head for numbers. He kept the accounts with precision, tracking every rupee earned and spent. "We made enough for rice and dal this week and still have 10 rupees to save," he announced proudly after their third market day. 10 rupees was nothing, a pittance compared to what they'd lost. But it was theirs, earned through their own efforts rather than charity or desperation. By the 5th year, their vegetable stand had expanded to include dried spices and lentils. Mina, whose bitterness had slowly transformed into resigned acceptance, now helped package the spices in small cloth bags she sewed from scraps. Priya, though still unable to attend school regularly, had learned to read from Arjun, who shared his old textbooks with her. In the evenings, she would read aloud from a tattered copy of the Ramayana, her small voice bringing the ancient epic to life in their humble home. It was during one of these reading sessions that a knock came at their door, an unusual occurrence in a village where people simply called out from the threshold. Rajiv opened the door to find a stranger standing in the fading light. The man was well dressed in city clothes, his shoes dusty from the road, but clearly expensive. "Are you Rajiv?" the man asked, his voice cultured and confident. "I am," Rajiv replied cautiously. The stranger smiled, though there was something sad in his expression. "My name is Aditya. I've come a long way to find you." "Do I know you?" Rajiv asked, searching the man's face for any hint of familiarity. "No," Aditya replied, "but you knew my brother, Vikram." The name hung in the air between them, like smoke from a sacred fire. Ephemeral yet powerful enough to summon the past in all its complexity. Behind him, Rajiv heard Mina's sharp intake of breath and Arjun's chair scraping against the floor as he stood. "Please," Rajiv said, finding his voice at last. "Come inside and tell us why you're here." As Aditya stepped across the threshold, Rajiv couldn't know that this moment would mark the beginning of a change as significant as the day he'd given Lakshmi away. A change that would finally answer the question that had haunted him for 5 long years. Had his sacrifice been worthwhile after all? Aditya sat cross-legged on the floor mat Mina had hastily arranged, his expensive clothes looking strangely out of place in the humble surroundings. The family gathered around him, Mina with her arms protectively crossed, Arjun standing tall behind his father, and Priya half hidden behind her mother, eyes wide with curiosity. "Would you like some tea?" Rajiv offered, observing the formalities of hospitality despite the tension vibrating through the small space. "Thank you, yes," Aditya replied, setting his leather satchel carefully beside him. As Meena busied herself preparing the tea, an awkward silence descended. Finally, Rajiv spoke the question that burned in all their minds. "You said I knew your brother Vikram, the man who took our cow." Aditya nodded, his expression solemn. "Yes, that's why I'm here. To tell you what happened after, and to fulfill a promise." Meena returned with the tea, served in their 3 remaining cups, one for Aditya, one for Rajiv, and one for Arjun to share with his sister. She herself would go without, as had become her habit in times of scarcity. Aditya took a polite sip before beginning his tale. "My brother did reach Delhi with your cow. And yes, our mother was gravely ill. That part was true. The money from selling the milk helped pay for her medicine, and eventually, for an operation she needed. So he sold Lakshmi's milk, not Lakshmi herself," Rajiv said, feeling a strange relief at this confirmation. "He would never have sold her," Aditya affirmed. "Vikram named her Daya, meaning mercy, because that's what she represented to him, to our family." Arjun leaned forward. "Is she still alive? Daya?" A shadow passed over Aditya's face. "I'll come to that. But first, you should know that my brother was not a con man or a thief. He was desperate, yes. Our mother had been ill for months, and we had already sold everything of value to pay for her treatments. When the doctors said she needed surgery, we had nothing left. So he traveled to villages, looking for someone to take advantage of." Meena interjected, her voice sharp with 5 years of accumulated bitterness. Aditya shook his head. "No. He had gone to visit our uncle in Nagpur, hoping for a loan. It was on his return journey that the bus broke down near Chandrapur. He was walking through the village, trying to find alternative transportation, when he saw your cow. The idea came to him then. Not a planned deception, but a desperate impulse. And I was the fool who made it possible," Rajiv said quietly. "No." Aditya's response was firm. "You were the compassionate soul who saved our mother's life. The operation was successful. She lived another 3 years because of what you did." The revelation hung in the air. 3 years of life for a stranger, purchased at the cost of 5 years of hardship for his own family. Rajiv wasn't sure how to feel about this cosmic accounting. "But that's not why I've come," Aditya continued, reaching for his satchel. "After the operation, when our mother was recovering, Vikram told her the full story of how he had acquired the cow. She was horrified. Not at him, but at the position he had put your family in." "Did she insist he return Lakshmi?" Priya asked, speaking for the first time, her young voice clear and direct. Aditya smiled sadly at the child. "She did. But by then, it wasn't so simple. Delhi was far, and Vikram had responsibilities there, a job he couldn't leave. So instead, he began to save money. Every month, a portion of his salary was set aside to repay you." From the satchel, Aditya withdrew a cloth-wrapped bundle. "Unfortunately, Vikram never completed his plan. 2 years ago, he was killed in a traffic accident in Delhi." Gasps filled the small room. Even Meena's hard expression softened slightly at this news. "Before he died, he made me promise to find you, to explain, and to give you this." Aditya unwrapped the bundle, revealing a stack of rupee notes. More money than the family had seen in years. "This is what he saved, plus what I've added since his death. It's not just the value of the cow, but interest as well. My brother calculated it meticulously." Rajiv stared at the money, unable to speak. It represented not just financial salvation, but vindication, proof that his instinct to help had not been entirely misplaced, even if the manner of that help had been manipulated. "There's something else," Aditya said, reaching again into his satchel. He withdrew a photograph and handed it to Rajiv. "This is Daya, your Lakshmi, with her calf, taken about a year after Vikram brought her to Delhi." The photograph showed the familiar brown and white cow standing in a small urban courtyard, a white calf beside her. Both animals looked healthy, well fed. "The calf was a female," Aditya explained. "We named her Karuna, compassion, to remember the kindness that brought her mother to us." Priya scrambled forward to see the photograph, her finger gently tracing the outline of the cow she barely remembered. "What happened to them?" she asked. "After our mother died, we couldn't keep them in the city. It was too difficult, too expensive. So we sent them to our family's ancestral village in Himachal Pradesh. They're there now, with my uncle's family." Meena, who had remained silent throughout most of the explanation, finally spoke. "So your family benefited twice from our loss. First the milk that saved your mother, then the calf that should have been ours." Aditya nodded, accepting the rebuke. "You're right. That's why I've brought one more thing." He produced a legal document from his satchel. "This is the deed to 3 acres of land just outside Chandrapur. Good land with access to water. It's yours if you'll accept it." Rajiv took the document with trembling hands. "How did you?" "I work for a development company in Mumbai," Aditya explained. "We've been purchasing land in this region for a new agricultural initiative. When I learned of your situation, I arranged for this parcel to be transferred to your name. The magnitude of this gift, land, money, and truth, overwhelmed Rajiv. 5 years of hardship couldn't be erased in a single evening. But the future that had seemed so constrained suddenly expanded with possibility." "I don't know what to say," Rajiv managed finally. "Say nothing," Aditya replied. "Or if you must speak, tell me that my brother's debt is settled, that our family's honor is restored." Rajiv looked at Meena, whose eyes shimmered with unshed tears, at Arjun, standing straighter than he had in years, at Priya, clutching the photograph of Lakshmi and her calf as if it were a precious gem. "The debt is settled," Rajiv said formally. Then, with a slight smile, he added, "Though I would like to visit Lakshmi, Daya, someday, if that's possible." "Of course," Aditya agreed. "She's part of your family, as much as she became part of ours." As the night deepened around the small hut, the conversation continued. Practical details of the land transfer, stories of Vikram and his mother, memories of Lakshmi shared by Arjun and Rajiv. Priya fell asleep leaning against her brother, the photograph still clutched in her small hand. Later, after Aditya had been shown to the village headman's house where he would spend the night before returning to Mumbai, Rajiv and Meena sat alone outside their hut, looking at the stars. "Do you remember what you said to me the day I gave Lakshmi away?" Rajiv asked softly. "You asked if kindness would feed our children." Meena nodded, her face illuminated by the moonlight. "I remember. It seems it will, after all," Rajiv said. "Just not in the way either of us could have imagined." Meena's hand found his in the darkness, the first such gesture in years. "The sadhu was right," she whispered. "The universe does keep its accounts." As they sat in companionable silence, Rajiv thought about the long, difficult journey from that fateful day to this moment of unexpected redemption. The hardship had been real, the suffering genuine. But so too was this resolution, this restoration that had come when he had almost abandoned hope. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll go see our land." "Our land," Mina repeated, the words carrying the weight of all they had lost and found again. "And perhaps someday, another cow." Rajiv smiled into the darkness. "Perhaps. But this time, we'll name her ourselves." Above them, the stars continued their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human drama that had played out beneath their gaze. But for Rajiv, the night sky seemed especially brilliant, as if the heavens themselves were acknowledging that sometimes, in this difficult world, justice and mercy could coincide in unexpected ways. And that was enough. The morning after Aditya's visit dawned clear and bright. Rajiv woke before sunrise, the familiar weight of dread absent. In its place was cautious optimism he had almost forgotten how to feel. Mina prepared tea with a generous portion of their precious sugar. "Today is worth celebrating," she said simply. Arjun emerged from sleep looking taller somehow. The burden of premature responsibility slightly lifted from his young shoulders. Priya clutched the photograph of Lakshmi and her calf. "When will we see our land, Baba?" she asked eagerly. "After breakfast," Rajiv promised. "And then we have decisions to make." The walk to their new property took them past the eastern edge of the Yao village. The headman, Govind Singh, joined them unexpectedly at the village boundary. "I'll show you the exact location," he offered, his manner more respectful than it had been in years. The land exceeded Rajiv's expectations. 3 acres of gently sloping soil, bordered by a small stream that flowed year-round. The soil was rich, with irrigation channels still visible beneath the wild grasses. "Good soil," Govind Singh commented. "Black cotton soil, the best for crops. You could grow anything here." Rajiv and Arjun walked the boundaries slowly, calculating and dreaming simultaneously. The boy pointed out optimal locations for different crops, applying everything he had observed during their years of hardship. "We could plant mangoes along the northern edge," Arjun suggested. "They'd take years to mature, but eventually they'd provide fruit and shade." Mina and Priya explored the small stone structure in one corner, a tool shed that could be expanded into a field shelter. "Could we have a cow again?" Priya asked hesitantly. "Perhaps," Mina replied, her voice softer than it had been in years. "But first, we must make this land productive." The headman cleared his throat. "The village council will meet tonight. We should discuss how to integrate this property with the community irrigation system, and perhaps it's time the boy returned to school." Back at their hut, the family divided Aditya's money. One portion for immediate needs, school fees, household repairs, proper clothes. Another for agricultural investment, seeds, tools, help with initial plowing, and a third set aside as security. "We should also set aside something for the temple," Rajiv suggested. "In Thanksgiving." Mina nodded. "And perhaps something for others in the village who struggle as we did." As the day progressed, neighbors began to visit, some curious about their change in fortune, others bringing small gifts. The same community that had shunned them in hardship now sought to reconnect. Late that afternoon, the elderly doctor who had treated Rajiv's mother arrived with a gift of medicinal seeds. "A small portion of your new land dedicated to these could serve both your family and the village," he explained. "And perhaps your daughter might learn their uses." After the doctor left, the family continued planning late into the evening, their modest hut filled with hope and purpose. When the children finally slept, Rajiv and Mina stepped outside to gaze at the stars. "I was wrong," Mina said quietly, "when I condemned your decision all those years ago." I couldn't see beyond our immediate suffering. And I was wrong to make such a decision without consulting you, Rajiv replied. We both had truth on our side, and we were both blind to the larger picture. We should visit her, Meena suggested suddenly. Lakshmi, Daya, in Himachal Pradesh. Not immediately, but someday. The children should see her again. Rajiv nodded, touched by the suggestion. A pilgrimage of sorts, to close the circle. As they turned to go inside, Rajiv paused for one last look at the star-filled sky, thinking of all the forces that had brought them to this moment. Do you think we'll ever understand why things happen as they do? Meena asked. No, Rajiv replied honestly. But perhaps understanding isn't what matters most. Perhaps it's how we respond to what happens, with bitterness or hope, with closed fists or open hands. Inside, their children slept peacefully. Tomorrow they would begin again, not from where they had been before Lakshmi's departure, but from a new place, shaped by all they had endured and learned. And that was a gift in itself. The understanding that no ending is truly final, and no beginning comes without the shadows and light of all that came before. 6 months after acquiring their land, the transformation was remarkable. The wild, overgrown field that had greeted them on that first momentous visit had undergone a metamorphosis that reflected not just physical labor, but the rebirth of a family spirit. What had been an untamed expanse of potential now displayed neat, orderly rows of wheat stretching toward the horizon, their green stalks swaying gently in the afternoon breeze like nature's acknowledgement of human perseverance. Near the stream that marked the property's eastern boundary, a thriving vegetable garden showcased a colorful variety of produce. Tomatoes heavy on their vines, chili peppers gleaming like jewels, cauliflower nestled beneath broad leaves, and okra standing tall and proud. Along the northern boundary, just as Arjun had suggested on that first day of planning, the beginnings of a mango orchard had taken root. The saplings were still young, their slender trunks supported by bamboo stakes against the occasional strong winds. But they represented the family's commitment to long-term thinking. Investments made today for harvests that might be years in the coming. Interspersed among these future giants were faster-growing papaya trees already bearing their first fruits. A compromise between immediate returns and patient cultivation that characterized many of the family's decisions. The stone shed they had discovered on their initial exploration had been transformed as well. No longer a dilapidated storage space reclaimed by spiders and field mice, it now stood as a small but sturdy shelter with a newly thatched roof, reinforced walls, and a covered porch constructed of bamboo and salvaged timber. Here the family could rest during long work days, taking their midday meals in the shade while watching over their growing domain. Priya had indeed planted marigolds around its perimeter, their bright orange and yellow blooms not merely decorative, but serving to repel certain pests from the nearby crops. Beauty and function harmoniously combined. Rajiv paused in his work of clearing a minor blockage from one of the irrigation channels, straightening to ease the familiar ache in his lower back. 42. His body still carried the memory of years of labor under far less favorable conditions. But these days, the pain felt different. The honest fatigue of working for oneself rather than the grinding exhaustion of toiling for others' benefit with little reward. He wiped sweat from his brow with a cloth Meena had embroidered with a simple pattern along its edge. A small touch of artistry that reflected their gradually improving circumstances. He surveyed the irrigation system with quiet pride. The channels they had expanded with help from neighboring farmers now formed an efficient network across the property, ensuring that water, that most precious of agricultural resources, was distributed optimally to all their crops. The monsoon season had been generous this year, the rains coming at the right times and in appropriate amounts, rather than the devastating deluges or disappointing sprinkles that climate change had increasingly visited upon the region. They had captured much of the excess water in the small reservoir Arjun had designed after studying traditional water harvesting techniques in the school library, ensuring they would have moisture for the drier months ahead, when less fortunate farmers might struggle. "Baba! Baba!" Priya's voice carried across the field, high and clear with excitement. Rajiv turned to see his daughter running toward him along the packed earth path that divided the wheat field. Her school uniform, a simple blue dress with a white collar, still remarkably neat despite the dust of the rural roads and her energetic pace. Her hair, once kept short out of practical necessity when soap and water were luxuries carefully rationed, now hung in two neat braids tied with blue ribbons that matched her school attire. "I got first in mathematics today," she announced as she reached him, slightly breathless from her run, but glowing with achievement. At 10 years old, Priya had developed into a study in contrasts, still maintaining the practical mindset formed during years of hardship, but increasingly allowing her natural intellectual curiosity to flourish as security replaced survival as the family's primary concern. Rajiv's face broke into a wide smile as he caught his daughter in a hug, lifting her briefly off the ground in a gesture of celebration that would have seemed wastefully exuberant during their leaner times. "That's wonderful news, Betty. Your mother will be so proud when she hears. Tell me about the test." Setting her down, he gathered his tools, a hand trowel, a small spade, and the sickle he used for clearing overgrowth around the channels. As Priya launched into an enthusiastic description of the mathematics examination that had covered fractions, decimals, and basic geometry, her detailed explanation of how she had solved a particularly challenging problem involving the area of an irregularly shaped field revealed not just mathematical aptitude, but the practical application of abstract concepts to real-world situations, a skill that formal education alone rarely cultivated so effectively. "Teacher says I should prepare for the district competition next month," she continued breathlessly as they walked together toward the main road that would take them home. "She says students from all the villages in the district will participate, and the winners go to the state level in Nagpur. Arjun is helping me practice after his own studies. He says mathematics is like a language, and I'm becoming fluent." The mention of his son brought another surge of pride to Rajiv's heart. Arjun had returned to school with a determination that impressed even his teachers, who had initially been skeptical about reintegrating a student who had missed several years of formal education. Though older than most of his classmates at 15, he had quickly made up lost ground, his practical experience with the family business giving him an edge in applied mathematics and sciences. The years of calculating profits and losses, measuring quantities, and estimating yields had provided him with an intuitive understanding of numerical relationships that his peers, despite their uninterrupted schooling, often lacked. "Where is your brother now?" Rajiv asked, adjusting his stride to match his daughter's shorter steps as they passed the boundary marker of their property, nodding in greeting to a neighboring farmer who was inspecting his own irrigation system. "Already at the market stall with mother," Priya replied, skipping occasionally in a physical expression of her good spirits. "Today is the first harvest of our tomatoes. We picked them early this morning before school, remember? Arjun said to tell you they're selling well, better than expected. The early crop is bringing premium prices since most other farmers' tomatoes won't be ready for another 2 weeks." This strategic timing of their vegetable planting had been Mina's idea, based on her growing understanding of market dynamics. By carefully selecting faster-maturing varieties and providing optimal growing conditions through their irrigation system, they had positioned themselves to fill gaps in the local market. offering produce when demand exceeded supply and prices were consequently higher. It was one of many small but significant innovations that had transformed their vegetable stand from a desperate survival measure into a thriving small business with growing reputation and regular clientele. "And did your mother send any other messages?" Rajiv asked, knowing Mina's habit of using the children as couriers for practical communications when they crossed paths during the day. "Yes," Priya nodded, her expression becoming more serious as she recalled her responsibility. "She says to remind you that the seed seller from Nagpur will visit tomorrow, and we need to decide about the winter wheat variety tonight. And also that Dr. G has come to see the medicinal garden and might stay for dinner." The vegetable stand had evolved significantly over the past months. With their own produce now supplementing what they purchased from other farmers, their profit margins had improved dramatically. Mina had developed a reputation for quality and fair dealing that drew customers from neighboring villages, some traveling several kilometers specifically to purchase from her. She had expanded their offerings based on customer requests and market observations, adding items like fresh herbs, certain varieties of chilies prized for specific regional dishes, and even flower garlands for temple offerings during festivals, which Priya helped to create in the early mornings before school. As they approached their home, no longer the humble hut that had sheltered them during their years of hardship, but a proper small house with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a built-in clay stove, and a covered veranda where they received visitors. They saw the doctor's bicycle leaning against the wall. It was an ancient but well-maintained vehicle, its black paint worn in places to reveal the metal beneath. Its leather seat cracked but carefully oiled to prevent further deterioration. Like its owner, it represented an earlier era's craftsmanship and durability, continuing to serve faithfully despite its age. Since their change in fortune, the elderly physician had become a regular visitor, his initial gift of medicinal seeds having blossomed into a mentoring relationship with Priya that surprised and delighted both the child and her parents. He shared his knowledge of medicinal plants with genuine enthusiasm, recognizing in the girl a natural affinity for healing that reminded him of his own early calling to medicine. Occasionally, when his arthritis made the journey to his clinic in the village center too painful, he would treat patients from the village on their veranda, with Priya serving as his assistant, measuring herbs, preparing simple tinctures under his guidance, and observing his diagnostic methods with keen attention. Inside the house, they found him seated at their dining table, a proper wooden one that Rajiv had commissioned from the village carpenter, replacing the makeshift arrangement of their poorer days. The doctor was examining the organized bundles of dried herbs that hung from the kitchen ceiling, Priya's growing pharmacy that supplemented his own dwindling supplies. His fingers, gnarled with age, but still precise in their movements, tested the dryness of lemongrass, holy basil, and calendula flowers, nodding in approval at their proper preservation. "Ah, there she is, my best student," he greeted with a warm smile that creased his weathered face into familiar patterns of kindness. Despite his advanced years, he had never confirmed his exact age, but village rumor placed him well into his 80s. His eyes remained clear and sharp, missing nothing. "Your mother tells me you've excelled in mathematics today. Congratulations. The healing arts require precision as well as compassion, you know. A wrong measurement can transform a remedy into a poison." "Yes, Dr. G," Priya replied respectfully, setting her school bag carefully on a chair before washing her hands at the water basin, a habit he had instilled in her from their first lesson together. "Numbers come easily to me. Today we learned about ratios, which seems very important for mixing medicines correctly." "Indeed it is," he confirmed, his expression brightening further at this connection between academic learning and practical application. Proportions are the foundation of pharmacology, the science of how medicines work in the body. Too little of an active ingredient, and the remedy is ineffective. Too much, and it may cause harm. This is why I always measure twice before preparing a treatment. He turned to Rajiv, who had set his tools in their designated place by the back door and was washing the field dust from his hands and face. I've come with news that may interest you and your family. The medical college in Nagpur has announced a special program for rural students with aptitude in sciences. It provides scholarships and preparatory courses for those who might otherwise lack access to such education. Your daughter should apply when she's of age, in about 7 or 8 years. It's never too early to set such goals in motion. The suggestion that Priya might someday study medicine formally at a prestigious institution would have seemed impossibly fantastical a year ago, when daily survival consumed all the family's resources and energy. Now, it felt like merely another door's opening in their expanding world of possibilities, significant but not unimaginable. Rajiv nodded thoughtfully, already mentally calculating what preparations such a path might require and how they might allocate resources to support it. We would be honored if she could follow such a path, he replied, his tone measured but unable to completely mask the pride he felt at this recognition of his daughter's potential. If her interest and aptitude continue in this direction. Of course, the doctor agreed readily. The child must find her own calling. I merely suggest possibilities based on what I observe. Speaking of observations, he continued, changing the subject with the conversational agility that characterized his interactions. Your medicinal garden is thriving. The ashwagandha is particularly impressive. I haven't seen such robust specimens in many years. The soil here must have exactly the mineral composition it prefers. Priya beamed at this praise of the garden that had become her special project, occupying a carefully selected corner of their property where it received optimal sunlight and could be easily irrigated. What had begun with the doctor's gift of seeds had expanded to include over 20 varieties of medicinal plants, each cultivated according to his instructions and her growing expertise. She had created a small notebook documenting their planting, growth patterns, harvesting times, and medicinal uses. The neat handwriting and careful observations revealing a methodical mind that combined scientific curiosity with practical application. Later that evening, when Meena and Arjun returned from the market, the family gathered for dinner at their table, joined by the doctor who had accepted their invitation to stay. Meena had prepared a meal that reflected their improved circumstances while maintaining the practical frugality that had become ingrained during leaner times. Rice grown in neighboring fields, dal made flavorful with homegrown spices, vegetables from their garden prepared with ghee that was no longer the rare luxury it once had been, and even a small portion of paneer that she had splurged on to celebrate Priya's achievement. The tomatoes sold out completely, Meena reported as she served the food onto brass plates that had been a recent acquisition, replacing the chipped ceramic ones they had used for years. And 3 customers asked specifically about our chilies for next week. One woman from the next village said she makes the journey because our vegetables taste different, more flavorful than what she can find locally. She asked if we use special fertilizers. It's the care in growing and harvesting, Rajiv suggested, accepting his portion with a nod of thanks. And perhaps the soil here has qualities we're only beginning to understand. The doctor says the same about our medicinal plants. The irrigation system is working perfectly, he added, turning to include Arjun in the conversation, acknowledging the boy's contribution to its design. We should have a good wheat harvest if the weather holds, I noticed today that the heads are forming well, with no signs of the rust that affected Sharmaji's crop last season. Arjun, now 15 and growing tall with the improved nutrition their new circumstances afforded, nodded in acknowledgement of this observation. I've been researching crop rotation strategies in the agricultural journals at school, he said, his voice deeper than it had been even a few months ago, occasionally cracking in the unpredictable way of adolescence. There are patterns we could implement that might improve soil fertility naturally and reduce pest problems without expensive treatments. The science teacher has been helping me understand the nitrogen cycle. He went on to share news from school about an upcoming science exhibition that would bring together students from several regional schools. The teacher thinks my project on water conservation could win a prize, he said. The quiet confidence in his voice, a new development that pleased his parents. I'm designing a model that demonstrates how traditional knowledge about water harvesting can be combined with modern materials for more efficient systems. It's based partly on what we've implemented here, but with some additional features I've been theorizing about. The doctor listened too, this with evident approval. This integration of traditional wisdom with contemporary science is exactly what our region needs, he commented, accepting a second helping of dal from Meena with a grateful nod. Too often, we discard valuable knowledge from the past in our rush to embrace the new, or conversely, cling to old methods without considering how they might be improved. The balanced approach your son describes is the path to sustainable progress. As they ate, plans and possibilities flowed freely around the table. Discussions of crop rotation for the next planting season, potential expansion of their market presence to include a stall in the weekly market of a larger neighboring town, educational opportunities for both children, and community initiatives such as the irrigation cooperative that Rajiv had helped establish among farmers whose properties adjoined theirs. The conversation was punctuated with laughter and gentle teasing, the ease between family members a healing as profound as their material recovery. Priya shared an amusing story about her classmate who had brought a baby goat to school hidden in his lunch container, resulting in chaos when it escaped during mathematics lesson. Arjun described a book he had discovered in the school library about ancient Indian astronomical calculations, marveling at the precision achieved without modern instruments. Meena mentioned that the temple committee had asked her to help organize the upcoming harvest festival, a position of community respect that would have been unthinkable during their years as social outsiders. The doctor contributed occasional observations and questions, his presence adding a dimension of wider perspective to the family's discussions. He had lived through India's independence, the Green Revolution, periods of conflict and peace, technological transformations, and environmental changes. Experiences that gave him a unique vantage point on their current circumstances and possibilities. Though he never imposed his views, his thoughtful comments often helped them place their personal decisions within broader contexts of history, society, and natural cycles. After the meal, as twilight settled over the village and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Rajiv sat on the veranda, watching the sunset paint the distant hills in shades of gold and purple. The air was filled with evening sounds. Children playing in the village lanes before being called home, cattle returning from pasture with bells tinkling around their necks, women calling to one another as they completed the day's final chores. These ordinary moments of rural life, once the backdrop to his anxiety and struggle, now brought a sense of belonging and contentment he had almost forgotten was possible. Meena joined him with 2 cups of evening tea, the aroma of cardamom and ginger rising with the steam. She had changed from her market clothes into a comfortable home sari, her hair loosened from its practical daytime braid. In the gentle evening light, Rajiv noticed the strands of gray that had begun to appear at her temples, badges of the hardships they had endured but also of the wisdom those experiences had cultivated in her. "I had a letter from Aditya today," she said, settling beside him on the wooden bench they had placed to enjoy the evening air. "The postman delivered it while you were still in the fields. His mother's cousin in Himachal Pradesh has invited us to visit during the harvest festival. They say Daya, our Lakshmi, is still healthy, though elderly now for a cow. Her daughter Karuna has calves of her own, the third generation if you consider Lakshmi as the first." She handed him the letter, written in neat Hindi on quality stationery. Rajiv read it slowly, absorbing the friendly tone and genuine invitation it contained. Aditya had maintained correspondence with them over the months since his visit, his letters evolving from formal updates on the legal aspects of their property transfer to more personal communications about his family, his work, and his continuing interest in their progress. This latest message suggested that the connection between their families had transcended its origins in obligation and restitution to become something more like friendship. "Do you think we should go?" Rajiv asked, refolding the letter carefully. "It's a long journey, and we've never traveled so far from home. The farm would need attention in our absence, and the children would miss school." "I think it's time," Meena replied, her voice soft but decisive. "The harvest will be completed by then, and we could ask Sharma Ji's son to tend the irrigation system for the few days we'd be gone. He's been wanting to learn about our reservoir design. The children's teachers would likely approve an educational journey to another region. And besides," she added, meeting his gaze directly, "I've never seen the mountains. Perhaps it's time we saw more of this country than just our small corner of it." There was something in her expression, a mixture of determination and wistfulness, that touched Rajiv deeply. During their years of hardship, Meena had been the practical one, focused on immediate needs and tangible solutions, skeptical of dreams that seemed to have no foundation in their difficult reality. That she now proposed this journey, with all its practical complications and emotional significance, represented a profound evolution in her outlook, a willingness to embrace experiences that offered spiritual and emotional rather than merely material benefits. The prospect of travel, of horizons expanding beyond their village and fields, seemed fitting somehow, a natural progression in their family's journey of recovery and renewal. Just as their circumstances had expanded from scarcity to sufficiency, from isolation to community belonging, so too could their experiences, their understanding, their connection to the wider world beyond. "Chandrapur." "Yes," Rajiv agreed after a thoughtful pause, watching as the first evening star appeared in the darkening sky. "It's time to move forward, not just in our work and home, but in our hearts as well. The children should know Lakshmi's story directly, not just through our memories and photographs. And we should complete that circle ourselves." From inside the house came the sounds of their children, Arjun explaining a mathematical concept related to his science project, Priya asking insightful questions that revealed her quick comprehension, the doctor occasionally offering clarifications from his broader knowledge. The future taking shape in their voices, in their interactions, in the natural way they absorbed and built upon each generation's wisdom, while bringing their own fresh perspectives. "We've come so far," Meena murmured, her hand finding his in the gathering darkness. The simple gesture carried echoes of their reconnection on the night of Aditya's visit, when long-suppressed emotions had finally found expression and healing had begun between them. In the months since, their relationship had continued to strengthen, moving beyond the mere partnership of survival, to rediscover the deeper connection that had brought them together in their youth. And yet, Rajiv replied, his fingers interlacing with hers in the familiar pattern of their shared life, I feel we're just beginning. There's so much ahead for us. For the children, especially. Arjun with his scientific mind and practical innovations. Priya with her healing instincts and mathematical precision. Who knows what they might become, what they might contribute, now that the path is open before them. He thought of how differently things might have unfolded if he had made different choices when Vikram came to claim Lakshmi, if they had succumbed to bitterness during their years of hardship, if Aditya had never discovered his brother's records or felt compelled to honor the debt. The delicate interweaving of choice and chance, action and consequence that had brought them to this moment of peace and possibility seemed almost miraculous in its complexity. Sometimes I wonder, he continued, giving voice to thoughts that often came to him during quiet moments of reflection. If all we endured had purpose beyond what we can understand. Not that suffering is ever justified, but that perhaps it prepared us in some way for whatever lies ahead. We know now what truly matters. We understand value in a way that those who've never lost everything cannot. Meena considered this, her expression thoughtful in the fading light. Perhaps, she acknowledged. Or perhaps meaning is something we create rather than discover, through how we respond to whatever life presents, through the stories we tell ourselves and our children about our experiences. Either way, I'm grateful for where we stand today, even knowing the path that brought us here. They sat together in comfortable silence as night settled fully around them, the temperature dropping slightly as it often did in the early autumn evenings. From the village temple came the distant sound of bells marking the evening arati, their resonant tones carrying across the darkened fields like a reminder of continuity amid change, of the cycles of devotion that had persisted through countless human dramas of loss and recovery. After a while, the doctor emerged from the house, bidding them good night before mounting his ancient bicycle for the journey back to his quarters near the village center. They watched his departure, the small headlamp on his bicycle creating a pool of light that moved steadily along the path until it disappeared around a bend. A remarkable man, Rajiv observed, to continue serving others with such dedication at his age, to share his knowledge so generously with the next generation. There's a lesson in that as well. Yes, Meena agreed. And in how he balances tradition with openness to new ideas. He told me today that he's learning about some new medical techniques from his grandson who studies in Delhi, incorporating what makes sense into his practice, while maintaining the core wisdom of his traditional training. This integration of old and new, of preservation and progress, seemed emblematic of their own family's journey, honoring the values and knowledge of the past while embracing the opportunities of the present and future. It was not always an easy balance to maintain, requiring constant discernment and occasional compromise, but it offered a middle path between rigid traditionalism and uncritical modernization. As the evening deepened toward night, they finally rose to go inside, where Arjun was completing his homework at the table, while Priya arranged her dried herbs in small cloth packets for the doctor to distribute among his patients. The scene of domestic tranquility, children engaged in purposeful activity in a secure home, represented everything they had worked and suffered to achieve. We should write to Aditya tomorrow, Rajiv suggested as they prepared for sleep later that night. Accept his invitation and ask about the best time to visit. And perhaps we should bring gifts, something from our land to share with them. The first harvest of our mangoes will be ready by then, and some of Priya's medicinal teas might be appreciated in the mountain climate. Meena nodded in agreement, her practical mind already turning to the logistics of such a journey. What they would need to pack, how they would travel, what arrangements would be necessary for the farm and business during their absence. But beneath these pragmatic considerations lay an emotional readiness that would have been unimaginable a year ago. A willingness to revisit the pivotal event that had altered their life's course, and to do so not with bitterness or recrimination, but with acceptance and even gratitude for where that difficult path had ultimately led them. As they settled into sleep, the sounds of the village night surrounded them. The distant barking of dogs, the rustle of wind through the neem trees that lined the lane, the occasional call of night birds. These ordinary sounds, the acoustic backdrop to countless human lives unfolding in their modest dwellings, seemed tonight like a kind of music. The complex, imperfect, beautiful symphony of existence, in which their family's story formed just one small but significant melody. Above them, visible through the small window that Rajiv had insisted on including in their bedroom design, the stars emerged in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to this small family's journey from despair to hope, from loss to recovery, from endings to new beginnings. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, had indeed kept its accounts. Not with perfect justice, perhaps, but with enough mercy to allow for healing, growth, and the precious gift of second chances. And that was everything.